Thanks everyone for showing up on a Monday morning. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Alessandro. Alessandro is was a PhD student at MIT. Sorry, still not a PhD student. He's now a professor at Berkeley, and he's done some fantastic work in crypto. I think he's done excellent work on zero-knowledge proofs, succinct arguments, and he's one of the few people I know who does some fantastic theory, but also writes really good code and is able to maintain these big projects like Zerocash. And today he's going to talk to you about applying these zero-knowledge arguments and proofs to Bitcoin. So take it away.
Right, thank you, Nant, and thank you for having me here today. So, so today I would like to communicate two things with this talk. First, I would like to describe to you what I think is a pretty fundamental problem with Bitcoin, having to do with its privacy. And then I would like to talk about a system that we developed to address it. And many of you might have heard Zerocash before, but I don't know how many of you actually know how it works. So I planned a fairly technical talk where we jump into the design and we reason about how exactly we put it together. So I hope today, if you the two main takeaways is why is privacy a problem, and so how do you sort of address it using specifically zero-knowledge proofs. And also just a few words, maybe a few more words about myself. So this is just one project that I work on, but something I'm very excited about in general are zero-knowledge proofs. And I really like them, not just because they are very useful, but also from a technical perspective. They touch upon not just applications, but the theory and application of zero-knowledge proofs is very deep from a mathematical perspective. So it's very exciting to work on that. So this is something I will not talk about today, but I'm happy to talk about at length, say, after the talk. All right, so let's jump into it and talk about Bitcoin's privacy problem. So let's start with maybe an allegory. Suppose that your bank approaches you and sort of offers you a new credit card, and with the sweet deal that you will pay almost no fees, right? And you're a bit suspicious and you ask, is there any fine print? And it says, well, not really, but we'll just publicly broadcast every payment that you make. So here's, for example, how it might be. Alice goes to Starbucks. She pays, I don't know, $8 for some fancy type of coffee. And boom, it gets broadcast. Maybe then she picks up an Uber ride. Again, same thing, gets broadcast the amount and the time. And the bank claims it's no big deal. It's a very invasive deal. Payment history actually reveals lots of information. Let's just kind of let it sink in, okay? So there's medical information. You could, for example, deduce the specialty of your doctors. That tells something about your health, right? Insurance companies could look at that and use it to increase the premium or even deny coverage, right? So, I mean, this happens already happens even without people broadcasting a payment history, right? Never mind if people did that. It also reveals not just timing, but timing correlated with specific establishments. It sort of reveals your travel patterns, right? It's a gold mine for stalkers, burglars, in fact, even assassins. And this may be like almost a joke in this country, but in other parts of the world, this may not be so much of a joke, right? So from the business perspective, if you own a shop or a small company, suddenly you're revealing a lot of information about your suppliers, your daily sales. In fact, there are laws today that prevent people with insider knowledge from trading like that, right? So if suddenly all of this insider information is available to the public, then sort of in trading becomes sort of public trading and private trading sort of they become almost the same thing. It's very difficult. So yeah, so when you say payment history reveals lots of information, it feels like, yeah, it's probably right. The more you think about it, the worse it sounds, okay? Right, so it's really a bad thing, right? So you should not accept this deal. And like banks don't do these things, okay? And obviously it's not just out of magnanimity. In fact, probably banks don't have souls anyways. There's actually federal laws that mandate some care with financial privacy. So one example would be the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act that actually mandates pretty hefty civil penalties to banks for violations of financial privacy. Okay, so they care about it. There's good incentives around it, and so regulations work in this case. So let's come back to Bitcoin. There's actually no opt-out. Okay, so the way it works is, every payment is publicly broadcast. And here how it might look, sort of in some sort of abstract way. But you might say, well, it's not the same. These are just addresses. So you see here, Alice is not written. It says, some arbitrary address. The recipient doesn't say Bob or Uber or Starbucks, whatever. It says some other address. Those are just addresses. Well, these are addresses that are known by everyone you interact with, right? So at some point, you actually do maybe buy some, you show up at the cashier, right? And so maybe that person knows that you were there. And anyone really can analyze the ledger, right? So you can actually, even though the ledger is a sort of sequence of transactions, you can actually pictorially show them. So if you think about the y-axis as addresses and time going that direction, you can literally write down a graph of the way the cash flows on the blockchain. And you can try to infer from the way the graph looks like about whether this is changing hands or it's the same hands, right? Or different people. And you can correlate this information with real world information. And suddenly, it's actually not so hard to turn addresses into real people. This has been done. This is not just a theoretical possibility. The FBI investigation into the Silk Road darknet market was completely facilitated by information that was available on the transaction graph. There's a really nice talk by Catherine Haun, who led the prosecution of several people involved in the Silk Road. And I think there's a TED Talk where it describes how the FBI used transaction graph information to track down these people and actually make concrete cases in court. So yeah, like carry the information. If you also maybe a more recent example, there is how many of you have heard of this subpoena to Coinbase? Right, so the IRS issued something called like John Doe summons to Coinbase. It said, please turn over the identity of all your registered customers from like 2013 to 2015. So this means that, so by the way, when you use an exchange for Bitcoin, you have to hand over your identity. So Coinbase does know what is your address and what is your real world identity, okay? If Coinbase were to turn over all of these records, suddenly the IRS would be able to link your identity with your addresses at the exchange, and then work backward and futurewards from that, learn a lot about your financial history, right? So Coinbase is fighting back because there was no concrete cause. I mean, they didn't try to elaborate any concrete argument why they think maybe a large fraction of Coinbase users might be evading taxes. But still, it's really worrisome, okay? There's also all kinds of academic de-anonymization studies that actually go ahead and take the transaction graph and try to sort of extract patterns, real-world identities. It's really interesting work to read. Basically, the more you look at the graph, the more you can learn. It's the fact that maybe in 2008, 2009, when Bitcoin came about, people thought it was anonymous. It was just one big sort of misconception. Okay, it's not at all anonymous. It's very far from it. So because of this, people have tried all kinds of mitigations to address this privacy problem. One of the useful sort of heuristics is to say, well, never use an address. Okay, just every time you move some money, just whip up some new address. Is that a question, or is it pointing at anything? Okay. By the way, feel free to stop me anytime if you have questions, okay? And it's Monday morning, maybe you're still sleeping, but just in case. So use a new address for each payment, so that it's never the case that you have the payment appearing multiple times, which means that for sure you can deduce that it was the same person moving that money. You can also say, even more than that, you could just get together with your friends, launder money together. So what does it mean? You pick some either service or some trusted friend. Everybody gives, say, 1 Bitcoin to the trusted friend, and the trusted friend redistributes. Now, what happens is that, say, this is Alice. She, together with a bunch of other friends, pooled their money. Now coming out, it's not clear whose Bitcoin is Alice's. Okay, this is just the Bitcoin equivalent of money laundering. So it's just a traditional. So even the cash-based systems is how you launder money, right? So you pass it through some transactions where kind of it's not clear where it came out, right? Now all these mitigations and heuristics, they seem harder to analyze, and probably are harder to analyze, but it's hard to quantify. And either way, tracks remain, okay? Because, for example, here you have to get together with your friends. Some other friends maybe stayed at home and didn't participate. So you know that they didn't participate. So it's a small so-called anonymity set, right? So either way, there are still correlations. And recent work actually just this year was analyzing these types of ways of washing money to protect your tracks. For example, in the context of Monero. Monero is another cryptocurrency. I'm not going to talk about it. But essentially, what it does is it mitigates a little bit privacy via techniques of this sort that are they're not just overlaid on top of the cryptocurrency like in Bitcoin, they're designed as part of it. But even if you do these things, there's still a lot of information that leaks through the transaction graph. So these are just mitigations, okay? Do they make sense at high level? And at the end of the day, the history of all transactions is there to stay forever. Okay, so maybe today you don't really understand it, maybe tomorrow you understand it better. And as you correlate more and more addresses with the real world, just the amount of information that you understand about the transaction graph, it monotonically increases, right? It just never comes down, right? It just can only go up, right? So as more, even as a simple example, suppose that maybe you have done an excellent job at using money laundering services, using new addresses for the past 5 years, and suddenly you interact with your best friend who is completely incapable of hiding his tracks. Okay, everybody knows it's him. Okay, who is him on the transaction graph, but they also know that you're the best friend, that you guys are best friends, and you interacted recently. Suddenly, the fact that he connected to you, right? He get de-anonymized. Maybe you get de-anonymized as well, right? So you can't even be responsible for your own fate, right? Sort of, because anyways, you're interacting with other people and they may be careless. So these really are, even mitigations would be a complement to these techniques, right? So in the long run, this is not going to work, okay? Are we convinced there's a privacy problem? I hope so. I see nodding, so I'm going to take it as that you're convinced, and so move on from here, okay? Now, even if you don't care about privacy, there's a separate argument to be made about this transaction graph that comes from a fungibility of money. How many of you have heard the term fungibility? Okay, a good fraction. Great. So essentially what it says is that a dollar is a dollar regardless of its history. It's a property that was actually recognized very early on in the history of money. There was actually a lawsuit dating back to over 350 years ago in England, where there was, I think, a merchant that misplaced some bill that he had marked for, I forget for what reason. And later he found this bill in the possession of a bank and wanted to claim it back because he recognized his mark and it claimed it was his. And at the end, whatever court was deciding the case ruled in the favor of the bank, saying that the bank sort of legally acquired that piece of money. It doesn't matter whether in the past this piece of money was stolen from the merchant or which hands it went through. The bank legally obtained it, so it was theirs. And as part of the ruling of the case, the court argued that if history of money matters to the point where it can be expropriated from legal owners of that money later on, then suddenly it's not clear anybody can trust money anymore, right? Because even the ownership of money is ill-defined. Okay, and from this perspective, Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies are not fungible at all because a coin's pedigree it's completely public, right? It's very explicit by design, almost, right? And this has many dangerous consequences, not just a matter of expropriating money that maybe belonged to you that was stolen. It can just go beyond the ill-defined value. You can have, different people could value the same coin differently just because they think differently. the same person may value different coins differently just because the pedigrees are different, right? Just think about it, right? You show up, you talk to a merchant you never talked before. Who knows? Maybe they have one religion or one political affiliation, and depending upon that, they might interpret your particular Bitcoin very differently. How do you conduct business like this, right? You can't build like a large, stable economy that you can reason about and in traditional economic terms when even value is not defined, right? And this basically says that new coins are sort of more valuable than old coins. What's the correct premium? Who assesses that? And now there is almost a tendency to come back to centralized architectures where there are central evaluators that vouch for coins and maybe they insure them, right? This is not where you want to go, right? So the entire point of decentralization was to avoid these things. So again, notice that this has nothing to do with user privacy, and yet it is something that arises because of the lack of user privacy. Okay, so even if you are, I mean, it's not maybe the crowd to talk to. I mean, Google cares a lot about privacy, but I mean, even if you didn't care about privacy, these are enough grounds to worry a lot about the transaction graph. Yes, hi.
Do you think that the lack of traceability of a dollar was a technical problem? Like, had they had the technology 350 years ago, things would have been different?
You mean for serial numbers or?
Something like that.
I don't know if they had serial numbers or not. Of course, there is the aspect of how do you keep track of, how do you investigate criminals, how do you keep track of money flows and whatnot. Clearly, having a transaction graph only helps. I don't know if that's serial numbers or not for these things in the past. But kind of the point about fungibility stands regardless, even with serial numbers, right? So if someone steals your wallet, right, and then goes and buys, I don't know, a bottle of water because they ran away from you and they're tired and need to drink, the $5 acquired by the kiosk owner that sold the water bottle, like, actually owns those $5, even if they were stolen from you. And whether you can track it or figure it out, it's kind of orthogonal. Like, so from economic terms, you want to argue that store owner has a legal right to those $5. Does it make sense? Like, it's kind of orthogonal to the traceability.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm wondering whether society would have made a different trade-off had they had the technology.
Maybe, but then you would have had an economic theory to back it up and sort of to develop it around it. And so I don't know whether it's mathematically tractable or interesting to develop an economic theory on a currency that comes with pedigree attached to it. It might be an interesting research direction that actually I'm not an economist, so I don't know whether anybody has investigated it. But so yeah, good question. So even beyond the whether values are well defined or not, the lack of fungibility also causes all kinds of other issues like price discrimination, right? So if you know who is paying you and they have deep pockets, maybe sort of you ask them to pay you more, right? And censorship, right? So if some unpleasant people start using Bitcoin, would the miners pick them up, right? So would miners pick up transactions from Trump family? I don't know. Maybe just say, you'll just leave them there. No one pick them up, right? It's a bad thing, right? Yeah.
So we arguably have all of these problems with just cash today, because if you think about different people value the same coin differently, well, maybe like beer costs more in San Francisco than in like.
No, but these are geographical things. Like if you show up.
We're presenting remotely, right? Can you repeat the question?
Yes, I can repeat sorry about that. I should have been doing that. The question was, don't we have some of these problems already with cash? So let me clarify on that. Now, clearly, so if you walk into a store, right? So it's not like the store owner can look at you and infer from the way you look or behave, like all of your transaction history in the past, and sort of charge you for a water bottle at a different price depending upon how you look and whatnot, right? So with Bitcoin, you can actually do that very precisely. It's not just a guess, right? So you could walk into a store and maybe just the way you behave or what you're wearing, they can more or less assess your status, socioeconomic status, right? But with Bitcoin, this takes it to a completely new level, right? They can actually assess very precisely your regular income, maybe your assets. So this is a very sophisticated level of price discrimination that you can do.
Similar to a credit check.
But the bank can do it, not an arbitrary person, okay? So right now, your bank knows everything about you, right? But it's not like the entire world knows a lot of information about you. That's a very different, I'm okay with my bank knowing all the dirty details of all of the transactions I do, it's fine. But I don't want sort of arbitrary people that they could try to frame me or to have, right? So, plus also banks is one of the most regulated sector of the entire economy, right? So they're not just sort of bandits out there. So it's very different.
And also the credit check is because you want to participate in the credit system. That's independent of you using
that.
money.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to derail actually, but the way that you rent an apartment, your private landlord can run a credit check. So it is leaking this information.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
But the credit check is, is about, they will not tell them how much you earn per month, right? So, yeah, good questions. I mean, of course, some amount of in order to conduct business, you need to have some idea of the financial status of the other person, and so on and so forth. This is also true at higher levels when you conduct company. But that has to do with reputation, and there are other mechanisms to keep track of these things. All right. Okay, so I think at this point, I hope we're convinced that privacy is an important problem. And why isn't Bitcoin private? Okay, why not? I mean, so somebody designed it, they did a good job. Otherwise, why wasn't this on the priority list? So the thing is, privacy and accountability are a bit at odds. So if you think about the way that Bitcoin works, it says. So I'm not going to go over it, by the way, how Bitcoin works. So let's assume that. Otherwise, we don't get to talk about the exciting part today. So you have this chain of payments, right? And at some point, you're wondering whether, say, Bob wants to pay Eve, say 1 Bitcoin. Why can't she do it? Okay. Well, yeah, you can just go back and see when did Bob receive it. Okay, he received it, 5 days ago from Alice. So yes, he can spend it, right? So the integrity of the system is predicated on the lack of privacy, because the entire state of everything that happened is public. Okay, so of course, miners can just keep maintain the state of the system always correct, right? So it's trivial, right? But say, oh, I want privacy. Kind of, the moment you want privacy, a natural or gut reaction would say, just great, just encrypt everything, send encrypted transactions, right? But if now suddenly users send encrypted transactions, it's not clear how you go back and check. Say, when a user sends a transaction, maybe he does encrypt, say, the payment under the what's Eve's public key, so Eve can decrypt it and figure out what Bob meant when he sent that encrypted message. But the rest of the system is just looking at this encrypted transaction, like, what the hell do I do with it? I don't know, maybe it's double spending some money underneath, right? So, so here, privacy and accountability are at odds. So this is, of course, not the first time it happened. It's always the case that they're at odds. But in particular, they're at odds here, and it causes a big privacy problem for Bitcoin, right? So to some extent, this first design of cryptocurrency, it is not surprising that maybe privacy was shoved a bit to the side, because it's kind of really not clear what to do to maintain integrity of the system otherwise. Okay? All right. So Zerocash protocol is something I worked on a few years ago. It was a cryptographic protocol to achieve a sort of Bitcoin-like digital currency that addresses this problem. First, it also works in the same model that, given some, let's say, ideal ledger, some append-only log, so you can sort of post transactions. But moreover, it's privacy preserving in the sense that anybody can post a payment transaction to anybody else, kind of like in Bitcoin, except that the transaction itself will probably hide the payment's sender, receiver, and amount. Also, just for the sake of today, let's just worry about the 3 pieces of information of a payment that we want to hide are who sends it, who receives it, and how much. Okay, these are the 3 main pieces. There are other things you could try to hide, but let's just worry about these 3 for now. Okay, the 3 key important parts of a payment. And it wasn't just sort of theoretical interest. We also used and specialized cryptographic techniques to the particular setting and achieved what I think are fairly feasible parameters, where producing transactions maybe takes like a minute, verifying them a few milliseconds, and they're not that big, maybe a kilobyte in size. And today I want to tell you about the actual design of this protocol because I like it a lot. I think it's is a really exciting application with zero-knowledge proofs, and given that Bitcoin is, I think it's a very exciting system, but it also has a big problem. It would be good to understand how it gets fixed. Okay. So the basic intuition is the following. At a very high level, the problem of just merely sending encrypted transactions is nobody can check them. So the very high level is to say, let's just ask users to send encrypted transactions along with proofs that whatever is in the plain text underneath the ciphertext is good, is some valid payment. Okay. So now if Alice paid Bob, she says, okay, I'm going to encrypt it, post it, and by the way, here's a proof for everybody else that I didn't double spend my money. And everybody does it. Okay. And very roughly, extremely high level, Alice will be saying the following. I am posting a transaction. It contains 3 ciphertexts. These ciphertexts are encryptions of a sender address, a receiver address, and a transfer amount, respectively. And of course, since I encrypted them, you don't know what these are. So I must convince you an amount has not double spent. And to do that, I've generated a cryptographic proof that all this is true. Okay? So does it make sense as a general? Of course, we'll delve into what this means concretely, but as a general approach, it seems reasonable, right? You encrypt, people don't know, so you prove on the side that something is valid underneath, right? Okay, so from this basic intuition to a protocol, there's a couple of things that we need to answer, okay? What kind of cryptographic proof? Okay, because there's many types of cryptographic proofs, so which ones capture the correct security properties to make this work? And second is, yeah, this is just English here. What do you mean contain encryptions of, what do you mean the amount transferred has not been double spent, right? So at some point I have to give it a formal meaning, okay? So what I want to do is to dig into these 2 questions. Let's just quickly get rid of the first question for a moment, and then we'll spend the rest of the talk on the second question to try to talk about the protocol itself. So what kind of cryptographic proof? First, it ought to be a proof. You may or may not be familiar with cryptographic proofs. This is not the talk where I'm going to dig into them. But roughly, a proof says that you can prove true statements, but not false ones, right? That's what a proof is, right? So if you try to prove that you have a transaction that doesn't double spend, but in reality you did double spend, you shouldn't be able to do that. Okay, that's what proof means. It should also be non-interactive proof, because you need to be able to write it down into a transaction and broadcast it. For the record, there's a lot of very useful proofs in theoretical computer science and cryptography that are interactive. Those are no use to us because we have to write them down. It also has to be zero knowledge. Again, I will not go into the definition of zero knowledge. This is not the talk where I talk about these things. But very roughly, if you were trying to protect plain texts by encrypting them, and now you attach a proof about the plain texts, you don't want the proof to leak information about the plain texts. In fact, here's a trivial proof for the plain texts. Just include the plain texts, and then somebody can check it, right? So that would not be like a zero knowledge proof, okay? So you have to do something different that basically doesn't leak information about what you're proving, so about the information that you're talking about beyond what you're proving, which is a valid payment, right? It has to be a proof of knowledge. I will not get to what this means, but what I'm getting to is that this 4 properties is something you may have seen before, something called a non-interactive zero-knowledge proof. It comes up sometimes in cryptography courses you may have taken before coming to Google. But another key aspect that is kind of new about the setting of Bitcoin is that you need these proofs to be really particularly short and easy to verify. And why is that? Because if now, I mean, the blockchain is already long as is, even without proofs, even if you just have plain payments and a signature, which is what Bitcoin is. And now you have every day, every hour, every minute, every second, bunch of transactions. And everybody has to remember them in a distributed, replicated data structure. You can't have big proofs, okay? So when you put all these things together, I forget this part, it's something that in cryptography we call ZK-SNARK. It stands for Zero Knowledge Succinct Non-Interactive Argument of Knowledge, which is basically these entire things. And these are basically proofs that are zero knowledge and with the right efficiency guarantees for setting like Bitcoin or Bitcoin-like payments. It's actually something I worked on a lot during my PhD. And if you want to play around with it, we also have an open source library that also Howard here did a lot of very nice work with. All right, so this is not formal, of course. It's just discussing a little bit in more detail what type of cryptographic proofs. What I wanted to do more of is the protocol design. So what exactly are you proving? Okay, how are you setting up? What is inside a transaction? What are you saying? And this requires some thought. And let's have some design fun. Okay, so now I want to do that. So before I jump into maybe the technical part of the talk, are there questions? So I think the high-level intuition approach makes sense, right? Whatever these proofs are, we can try to use them. We can just think they're zero knowledge, whatever that means, right? It just doesn't leak. And now we can just go ahead and try to use them. Yeah.
Heard some comments about the blockchain becoming intractably large. Does this protocol do anything to address that, or to do different?
Well, to some extent, will make the problem worse, right? Because instead of leaving just plain payments, we'll have encrypted payments plus proofs. But the proofs will be so small compared to other things there that it will be like a very small. A separate issue is, regardless of privacy, how do you deal with ever-growing data structures? Maybe to contrast it with, say, certificate transparency, where I assume you're familiar with certificate transparency, where certificates have expiration dates, right? So when you have some big Merkle tree that is finished, kind of you freeze it, right? And when all of the certificates in it are expired, you can just throw it away, right? This is not something that happens with Bitcoin. Okay. Even if all of the payments in the past have been kind of exhausted, there's still other reasons that you need to keep around the rest of it. That's a problem that's a result of this one. We'll be making it worse, but only sort of in relative terms, not very much so. All right. So I will be first, the way to understand a protocol is to try to build it and see the problems and go over several iterations. So I will be going through several strawmen that all have the same format. So step 0 will be describing the format of the strawman. Okay. So in the top part of the slide, I'll be showing the view of the blockchain. Different colors will denote different types of transactions. And I will describe each type of transactions. We only have 2 types of transactions. Okay. And we'll be little by little building a coin data structure. So, sorry, there's a podium in front. I don't know if I can move it. No, sorry. You can move in the audience if you want to. So here in the bottom left, we'll be little by little building a coin data structure, just to keep track what that means. Okay. And let's go ahead. All right. Let's start with a very stupid design. Okay. Let's just define a coin to be a random serial number. Okay. So a coin is an English word. I just identified with a random serial number. Okay. So I have a coin when I have a random serial number. How does it come into existence? There is something that we call a mint transaction. A mint transaction consists of the string MINT concatenated with a serial number, and you should supposed to interpret it as saying, I have consumed one Bitcoin to create a value 1 coin with serial number SN. Okay, this you do it in the privacy of your house, and then you can also spend it. So let's see. Someone could just post a mint transaction saying, hey, world, I have made a coin with serial number SN1. Maybe somebody else, or maybe you again, you say, hey, world, I've done, I've created a coin with serial number SN2. And then maybe this person decides, okay, I'm spending it. Here it is. I'm burning it up. Okay? And it continues like this.
Could you explain on the mint transaction, what does consume mean?
Yeah, so for now, you can just think about that we're building a privacy overlay on top of Bitcoin with some other, like maybe blockchain on top, or like maybe you can think about the system is aware of different types of transactions. Later, we'll get rid of the overlay. We'll just do everything in one blockchain. So for now, all I want to say is just create some currency. It has to come from somewhere. So I'm just saying for now, define the system to borrow it from Bitcoin. Now, this this design is so broken in many ways. Maybe you have a lot of questions in your mind. So let's just go through them. So first, I just want to tell you that the fact that we associate a coin with a serial number, at least it says that the system doesn't allow me to say spend twice with the same serial number, right? So it's a good thing. Now, there are many bad things here. For example, when you see a spend, you can see the mint corresponding to it, so they're linkable. Second, anybody can spend. There's nothing that says that I own a coin, right? So you mint a coin, suddenly somebody, I see the serial number, spend. So it's not even clear what it means to own a coin, right? And many other things. But all I really wanted to do with this slide was to say, let's think of serial numbers because they help us with double spending. Okay? All right, so let's try to improve from here. Let's have committed serial numbers. So now the coin data structure, it's not just a serial number, but you commit to it. Of course, you need to have some randomness to commit to it, and you get something that I'm going to call a coin commitment. Okay? So now when you mint, you're going to broadcast not the plain serial number, but a commitment to it. And it says, I have consumed 1 Bitcoin to create a value 1 coin commitment. Okay? Value 1 coin with commitment CN. And when you spend, you just reveal the commitment information. Okay, you just say, here's the serial number, here's the randomness I used for a commitment. Okay, so how would it work? So now you mint, and you reveal your commitment. Mint again, maybe it's you or maybe somebody else. And when you spend, you say, hey, here's the commitment information. Because I'm providing both the serial number and the randomness, you can actually go and check that it corresponds to some previous coin commitment. Okay? And it continues like this. So let's go see what's good and what's bad. It is still the case you cannot double spend, because if you see twice a spend transaction with the same serial number, you will reject it. Others cannot spend on my coins. It's already an improvement, right? Because I know the commitment information and you don't know it, right? So to reveal it, you will need to kind of invert the commitment, okay, which is supposedly cryptographically hard, right? Let's look at the bad things. So we certainly haven't made any progress in terms of privacy, particularly when you can, like in Bitcoin, judging the validity of a spend requires finding the corresponding mint, right? So we have a lot of linking going on here. There's other problems. Okay, but we're making progress. So let's try to do a little bit of progress in the linking part. Let's keep the mint transaction the same, but now in the spend, instead of revealing the serial number and the randomness, I'm going to reveal a proof that I know the randomness. A zero-knowledge proof that I know the randomness. Okay, let's look at that. So the spend transaction, now we'll have serial number and a proof. And the proof will be saying the following. I know a secret randomness R such that, first and foremost, CM, the coin commitment that I have in mind, was minted at some point in the past. So it belongs to the list of all prior commitments. Okay? By the way, how to do this efficiently, you can use a Merkle tree. But forget about it. So it belongs somehow in the previous list of all prior commitments. And moreover, the coin commitment I have in mind actually corresponds to the serial number that I'm revealing. Okay, so once again, I'm telling you a serial number and a proof. And the proof is saying, I know some secret R, such that if you take that R and you put it together with the serial number I'm revealing, I get some coin commitment. And this coin commitment appears in the list of all coin commitments I have ever appeared on the blockchain. Okay? Never mind how you do this. This is the magic of the zero-knowledge proof. I cannot explain right now how you procedurally go ahead about it. Let's just take it as a given that whatever statement I can write down, I can prove. Okay, suppose you proved this. Okay? Now, what has happened? Oh, by the way, actually, interestingly, is what I'm describing right now is actually ideas that were around already 20 years ago in the context of verifiable banks. You can actually construct an auditable bank using these ideas. I'm just rephrasing them in the blockchain world. So you want to look up the paper, it's very interesting, short and quite understandable. So what's good about this design? First, it's still the case I cannot double spend because we still have this idea of serial numbers. We still have trapdoor information about coins, so that it's not like arbitrary people can spend my coins. But now spend and mint are unlinkable because when you spend, you don't know which of the previous mints. Now, of course, you do know that it relates to one of the previous mints because you can only spend things that have been created. So there's an anonymity set there. Yes, there's a question.
So is there a reason that the SN2 has a 2 next to it? Like in this slide, it appears that SN2 is linkable to CN2.
So the question is there a reason why SN2 has an index into it? No, it's just for the slide. Of course, somebody observing the blockchain will only know that SX, suppose the blockchain actually starts at the beginning of the slide, okay? Whoever, if that were the case, and you see a spend, you don't know whether it belongs to the first or the second, but it must be one of the first two if the blockchain starts here, right? Of course, if the blockchain goes way into the left, then it will be any of the mints that came before. The question? So we're making progress. So what is left that, to some extent, to do? Well, there's actually a lot of things that are still done that we just haven't gotten around to. First is there's a fixed denomination, which is actually a side channel. Because if I have to pay you 5 Bitcoins, I have to do 5 transactions, and you can see that. Okay, it'll be correlated in time, there will be, right? So there is a side channel of information. So I want to be able to have variable denomination. So let's fix that first, okay? And that will cause some problems, you have to fix those two. Are we together so far? All right, variable denomination. Again, so we make the coin data structure a little bit more complicated. So now we have a nested commitment. The outer commitment keeps the value, and the inner commitment is like before. We have a serial number and some randomness. Okay. Now, because I've changed my data structure, I will have to change the mint procedure because my coin is different. So when I mint, I will reveal the coin commitment, the value, the inner commitment, I'm calling it K, and the randomness for the outer commitment. Okay. Why? Because first and foremost, when somebody sees all this stuff, they can check that this coin commitment actually corresponds to this stuff. Okay? If you just basically apply the commitment to the concatenation of the value, the other commitment and the randomness, you should be getting this part. Why am I revealing the value? Because I have to, you're creating a value of Bitcoin. You have to say how much you're generating because you're burning Bitcoin from some other part, right, of the system. Now, when you spend, you want to be able to some extent recreate an amount of V, so you have to tell the system that is the case. So I'm going to reveal the serial number, the value, and a proof that I could spend this. So let's see, it's just a simple generalization of what I did before. I prove that I know secret randomness, not just R, but R and S, because now there are 2 commitments, such that, first and foremost, the concomitant I have in mind does appear like before. Moreover, the concomitant is well formed. Namely, if I take the serial number together with the inner randomness, I get the inner commitment. And when I pass this inner commitment to the outer commitment, the correct randomness that I claimed to know, I get the concomitant here that I'm saying it's part of the previous list. Okay? We're just adding value to whatever we had before. Okay? And to add value, we had to have these 2 commitments. So that's what happens. Okay? Now, this is fine, it's variable denomination, but it causes problems. So first, just see at least, yes, you can still not double spend, others cannot spend my coins, and spend and mint are unlinkable. And we have variable denomination. But does anybody see why variable denomination caused some trouble, just from a privacy perspective? Yeah?
Yeah, there's only a subset of the previous mint transactions that are of that denomination.
Yeah.
So you've revealed much more information by relying only on that subset of mint transactions.
Right. The anonymity set was partitioned according to value. When I spend, say, 5 Bitcoins, it could only have come from people that have minted 5 Bitcoins, and they could be a much smaller subset of all of the mints. Okay, that's problematic. And to some extent, this is really, really problematic because if I'm relying on some underlying currency to burn and create coins, and I have this private channel to go to and then spend, I really need to come back to it and I have to declare the value at the end. So the next thing that I want to do,
It seems like the Chaumian cash system, the Chaumian binding also had this problem, right? Okay.
Yeah. But now we'll be trying to do more than that, right? So now what we're going to try to do is think about how can we just forget about the base currency that we're borrowing from. I just want to be able to conduct payments sort of within the system without talking about burning and so recreating Bitcoin underneath. In order to do that, I need to introduce some notion of address within this world too. So in the next 2 slides, what I want to do is I want to introduce addresses. And with the notion of addresses, we'll be able to have users address each other directly, pay each other directly without having to reveal the value of coins when they pay, and then lose the anonymity set. Okay, is it clear? All right. So next slide. Let's introduce payment addresses. So if I introduce payment addresses, that's again more data structures, right? So I'm going to leave my coin almost the same, but now I want to tell you what is an address. Okay, an address is going to be very simple. First, there's going to be some public key that denotes ownership of the coin that you will just plug in here. Okay, before there was nothing, there was no notion of ownership. Now when you create a coin commitment, you throw in there also a public key. What is a public key? It's just some hash of a secret key. Okay, so you take you just think about it as some hash. You sample some random string, you hash it. That's your public key. Okay. Formally, you use a random function indexed by the hash key, and you evaluate it at 0, something like that. But think about it just a hash. All right. So, and before we had a serial number directly plugged into here. Okay. But now, for reasons that will become clear in a moment, I want the serial number have to depend on the secret key. This would be like a key aspect of the design that I cannot explain in this slide. In this slide, all I want to do is to introduce addresses. Okay, and then we're going to leverage the fact that serial number depends on the secret key in a moment in a very crucial way. Okay, but this syntactically, again, all I've done is we still have the 2 sides of the commitment, the outer and the inner. It depends on the coin commitment depends on the public key. There is some correlated randomness that connects a coin and the serial number. Okay. The serial number depends on the secret key. And of course, the public key and the secret key are related. Okay. Now, all I really want to do is to redo the previous slide with this data structure. And then we can reason about why this data structure helps us. So now if we want to mint, I'm still going to mint like before. It's just I create the coin commitment in a different way. And when I spend, I just have a slightly different statement. Before, I was saying, I know randomness R and S. Now I have to reveal a lot of information because, for example, when I spend, I'm not revealing who owns it. Right? I'm not saying that a certain public key was responsible for this spend. So it means that that's also part of my secret information that I'm proving knowledge of. Right? So now what I'm going to do is say, okay, I have in mind a coin commitment. It was minted at some point in the past. It is well-formed. Now, well-formed means that if I take my public key, I put together the serial number randomness. So this is whatever created serial number. I get the inner commitment, and I compute the outer commitment. I get the correct one. And moreover, I provided a public key, secret key pair that is well-constructed. Okay, so the hash of the secret key really is the public key. Otherwise, I can just provide just garbage, right? I have to check that the key pair is well formed. And moreover, the serial number is computed correctly. Okay, I just want a few remarks about this construction. Again, first, I am not revealing anything about who owns these coins. For now, I'm still revealing the value. Okay, we'll fix that in a moment. And we know that the value is a problem because it partitions the anonymity set. All I wanted to say was, if I have these addresses, I don't need to reveal them when I spend. Okay? So at least if I am partitioning the anonymity set according to values, I'm not further partitioning it according to addresses. Okay? At least different addresses that spend the same amount of money, they will look the same to a third-party observer. Okay? Are we together? Yes, question.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting to the interesting part.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to like go on.
So I want to make sure that a couple things are correct, so I'll follow you. List of prior commitments. This is not like a linear list of commitments that I run through it and then, aha, I found a match, because that would not be zero knowledge, right? Then I know which one it is.
Well, I think it would be, but it would be inefficient. So let's go through it. Suppose that here I really did say list of all prior commitments, like literally all, right? And I just say one of them. That's okay. I'm not telling you which one. Of course, you already know the list of all prior commitments because I'm posting at a particular moment in time, and you can just look back, and everybody knows the list of prior commitments is public. All I'm proving is your knowledge is that a membership, that it is one of them. Now, to do it efficiently, the way you do it is you don't actually write them all out. You have the system maintain a Merkle tree over all coin commitments. And really here, you will talk about the root, saying that relative to the root of the Merkle tree of all previous coin commitments, I can exhibit an authentication path to one coin commitment within them.
So what I don't get is, if it's zero knowledge, then I don't know which commitment.
Right.
So I think if you're telling me a path in a Merkle tree.
I'm not telling you a path. I'm telling you that I know a path, but I'm not telling you which one.
That's just magic. I need to.
Yeah. That's a different talk for other things. So.
The other question, when you said public key and secret key, I immediately thought of asymmetric encryption like RSA or something like that. But then you said secret key, you hash it to get the public key. So are you just using those in a more generic sense than?
Yeah, so the question is, sorry, I've not been always repeating the questions. So question is public key, secret key? Usually it's in the context of public key crypto, and there's a number of theory associated with it, maybe like factoring or discrete algorithms. In this case, because we're using the zero knowledge proofs that to some extent are public key crypto, I can afford to even use symmetric key primitives to create public and secret key pairs. So yeah, I'm literally thinking of a hash here. Actually, in an implementation, we would put like SHA-56 here. The point I wanted to make was, yeah, so we're about to get to the punchline, but now at some point we have to make the leap and just have users pay each other directly. Now at least we have identities, because if I want to pay somebody, I can think of an address, right? Before there wasn't the notion of who do I pay, right? At least now the coin commitment has an owner, right? So, and I can try to pay somebody. So let's see how I could try to do that. All right, so this was just how you do it. Right. Direct payments, how do we do them? All right, Mint, I'm still not going to change it. Okay, and I just want to convince you for a moment is that if later spend doesn't reveal values, we are not going to have issues with anonymity set, right? Because you have to inject currency, money into the system somehow. This is just one choice of how you can inject money into it. There are many other designs. But here you can still say, when you mint, you burn some amount of money from somewhere else. Another system has this amount of money. But if it never comes out, that's OK. Your anonymity set is going to be good. Because if later a spend doesn't reveal how much it spends, you still benefit from all mints, regardless whether the mints can be divided by value. OK? So here I'm not going to change it. But this is going to get to the question.
Does the spend necessarily still refer to a single previous mint event?
No, now we're going to see that it's not going to do that. Great question. So the question is, does a spend have to refer to a mint? The answer is no, it could refer to a previous spend. And now we're going to see it here. This is just how to boot up the system with currency. In fact, you don't even have to do it like this. You can just say that when things are mined, it automatically sort of adds some currency into the system. It doesn't have to be sort of doesn't have to leverage off of anything really.
Actually, that wasn't the intent of my question. I wasn't thinking about previous mint versus previous spend. I was thinking about can you spend the sum of several mints, or can you spend a subset of the sum of several mints?
Yes, so we will get to that as well. Now I'm going to do coin-to-coin transactions, and later we'll see how to merge and split. But the hard part is to just get like direct, so user to user, even without merging or splitting. All right, so now what I want to do is in the spend, I wanted to do two things. Spend so far has only done one job, burn a coin. Now I want the spend to burn a coin and create another one. We already know what it means to burn a coin. It means to reveal its serial number. So the serial number of coin A. If I want to create another coin, I know what to do. I just create a coin commitment for it, for the coin B. Okay? And to some extent, all I really need to do is to provide a zero-knowledge proof that I did all this stuff properly. There's no value here. Okay, I just burn some coin and create another one of the same value. Let's see just what the statement might look like. What am I doing with time? Okay, so I have like, I think 5 minutes I can be done. It'll be maybe 2 minutes over. Here's the zero-knowledge proof that I know a bunch of secret information for the first coin, which means the coin commitment for the first coin, the value, the address, all the secret information, whatever. Just all the chapter information for the first coin. And it's well formed. This is the same thing as before. I'm just saying, it was created at some point. It's well formed. I know the secret key. The public key is well formed. Okay, I didn't change anything here. But now I don't stop here. I also say I'm revealing a coin commitment for another coin that I dreamed up. Okay, it's another data structure. It has this coin commitment, this value. Okay, has this public key. Okay, and it's well formed, and they have the same value. Okay, so notice what is happening. I have burned a coin and created another one, and in creating another one, I did not need to know the secret key. So in particular, this address may have not been mine. It was yours, okay? And this is the point of the symmetric data structure here, that the core part of the coin only depends on the public key, because when I want to pay somebody, I want to be able to create this part of the data structure in order to create the coin. But only when I spend it, I need to know more about it. You see, this is the main point of the payments, okay? It is important that the coin is bound to an owner through its public key, but for spending it, you need to have a different piece of information that depends on the secret key. Okay, that's why when I spend it, I need to know more trapped information, but when I mint it, I need to know less. Okay, so with this mechanism, I can pay other people or myself even if I want to sort of maybe shift around some money. And this gives us direct payments. Okay, so now the spends don't reveal any information about the actual value. All right, so last slide. Let's look at the mint so let's look at the join and split. But this is a point of the protocol. Okay, that at some point you can get to an asymmetric situation. You can just spend your own coins. You cannot spend other people's coins because of the asymmetry of the data structure. Okay, and basically you can prove all of this in zero knowledge. So then you're fine. Okay. All right. All right, let's just forget that comment. How about joining and splitting? You just generalize. You just say, hey, mint is the same. Now when you're poor, we call it poor instead of spending. You can just pass in 2 coins and create 2 coins. Okay? And you can just merge and split wherever you want. And of course, if you have 2 coins coming in, then you prove the same thing you were doing before for each of these 2 coins. And if you have 2 coins coming out, you prove the same thing about those 2 output coins you were doing for the output before. And yeah, you need to also prove that the sum of the input values equals the sum of the output values, that balance is preserved. Okay? And again, like I'm not writing it out, but you just basically do the same thing. Okay, it's something that we call poor. And now if you have 2 of your coins, you can merge them together first, or you can split them, right? I hope this makes sense. And then your transactions will look like this. Okay? In a nutshell, this is the Zerocash protocol. Okay? So what we're doing is we're encrypting. We're not really encrypting. We're kind of committing to stuff, okay? Revealing just what the bare minimum that is necessary to prevent double spending. And the rest is basically under the hood, proved on the side with a zero knowledge proof. Does that make sense? Okay, so you see there's a bit of a gap between saying I proved that the payment is valid to actually designing a protocol, because you have to actually decide what exactly you reveal. Yeah, first question here.
So when you're like minting coins after like a transaction, right? Do you need to be clever about like obscuring like, the so let's say you have like you need to mint 10 coins, right?
Yeah.
Should you actually mint the value 10, or should you do like 10 coins that are all?
It's better to mint the value 10 because there is no. So the question is if you want to mint, I don't know, like 10 bitcoins, you want to do it all across 10 transactions or 1 transaction? You can totally do it in 1 transaction, because later, whether you split your coin multiple times or not, it kind of gets lost in everybody else's transactions, right? So whether you're taking your 10 value coin and splitting it 10 ways or 20 ways, which by itself maybe could reveal how many times you split, right? There's anyways, everybody else's transactions look exactly the same as yours. Okay, so the anonymity set is full. So no matter what you do, your anonymity set is precisely sort of all the previous coin commitments, whether they're part of mints or spends. Right? So there was another question first here. Yeah.
Where would be a good place to get an introduction to zero knowledge groups?
Introduction. Well, first there is I think it's a great talk by Shafi Goldwasser, recorded by the Simons Institute at UC Berkeley. I think it's a survey talk, let's say. An introduction, I think that there's a book by Jonathan Katz and Yehuda Lindell, I think covers basics of zero-knowledge proofs. I think that would be like a great place to look at. I think it's a good level.
So early on, I followed how it is that the protocol, that across your first several approximations, how it is that you're protected against double spending. I no longer see how you're protected against double spending.
So one aspect of double spending is the fact that once you commit to a coin, you have also committed to the serial number and your public key. So when you try to spend this coin, there is only one serial number that you can give. And that is the one induced by your serial number, randomness, seed, and the secret key. Why? Because you cannot find two different secret keys that give the same public key. Okay? And similarly, also this one is collision resistant, so you cannot find two different secret keys or different serial number seeds that give you the different. But basically it's this one, right? So you have one public key, you cannot have two different secret keys that give rise to it, okay? So that there's only one serial number you can say later. Hope that makes sense. Great question. Yeah?
Yeah, I really like the protocol, but I assume this is not built into the Bitcoin protocol and all the clients that will be able to use the algorithm that you're using. So how does this work in the whole Bitcoin system?
Right. So for the record, this protocol we invented it like 3 years ago, and then about a year ago we launched it as a separate cryptocurrency. So it's completely unconnected. It's a blockchain on its own. And in particular, you don't have to mint anything. It's just money gets created in the usual way as in Bitcoin through mining, and then it kind of enters the system like that. Okay. So it's an alt chain in that respect. So it doesn't interface in any way. Yeah.
Have there been any advances in the toxic waste problem for bootstrapping the Zsnark?
Okay. So maybe let's jump. I want to maybe conclude, and I will address that question because they told me. So, but when do we need? I think to get out maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So I'm going to jump to a question that is related to a setup. So I want to briefly talk about it because I think it's pretty interesting. What happened here? All right, here. All right. So for the record, zero-knowledge proofs are the main tool used, and the current tool, concrete instantiation of zero-knowledge proofs used in the system, requires a one-time centralized trusted setup. It's very inconvenient, obviously, because if you wanted to set up a zero-knowledge proof to use it in a decentralized system, there's no trusted party. Right? It's a one-time, but still a problem. So what we did in this particular case for launching this cryptocurrency is that we actually designed a tailor-made secure multi-party computation protocol such that you would have to corrupt all parties participating in the protocol in order to corrupt the setup itself. We actually ran it across 6 parties. It took like 2 days to run. Beyond the protocol itself, there was a lot of difficulties in terms of practical security because you not only need to run it, you just need to secure the system itself. And so anyway, it's a different story, it's a different talk. There's a lot of information you can find online. There's also a really funny Radiolab podcast about this. But it doesn't have to be so. From a theoretical perspective, there are zero-knowledge proof constructions. All they really need is public randomness. So you could just take, I don't know, stock market values for, I don't know, the first 50 years of the 20th century, kind of boil it down to like a short random string using some randomness extractor and use that. Okay. So that would be like a more reliable source. Actually, a lot of my research these days is on improving the efficiency of such zero-knowledge proofs. There is a lot of exciting progress, and I think we will see some deployment of these things in the next maybe 2 or 3 years. So yeah, there is progress, and it's one of the problems that I care about the most because this setup is very annoying. Formally, it is basically constructing this type of zero-knowledge proofs in the random oracle model, if you know what it is. I hope that answers the question. Okay. Yeah.
In the slide that was marked number 6, you were talking about the out-of-band communication between the sender and the receiver.
Yeah.
Does the receiver have to trust the sender there? Because I think APKB has to be sent to the sender in order for that person to generate the zero knowledge.
Actually, not just that. APKB, I hope B knows it. It's their address.
Oh, that's
but there's other trapdoor information I created in creating their coin that they need to know to spend it. Okay? And there's many ways to do it. You could send it out of band. Like maybe it's your friend, you call him, or you send it via Signal, whatever. You can also just encrypt it and put it in the blockchain. You can just encrypt it, right? And the person will just decrypt it with their public key. And they can just scan the blockchain for payments addressed to them. And you can just figure it out by decrypting and seeing if there's garbage underneath or not. But it's kind of like exactly how you communicate the information is orthogonal and may vary across different applications. So I want to take more questions, but I want to make like one concluding remark. So so we know that all this so transition between from trusting to trust but verify. Maybe at Google it's most well captured by certificate transparency, right? So it's kind of CAs are usually fine, but it's better to have like additional checks. But if the way of verifying things is to add a lot of information about the system, the state of the system, in fact, the full information of the state of the system, that's what Bitcoin does. And in fact, that's also what certificate transparency does. It just makes everything public. Now you get into a situation where privacy actually becomes an issue. Accountability suddenly is fixed by definition because everything is public, so you can always audit it, right? But I have these issues of privacy that sometimes do get in the way of particular applications. So kind of, to some extent, I think like the right answer sits somewhere in the middle. Yeah, you should trust but verify in zero knowledge, where so you explicitly designate certain things to be public and you keep the rest as private, okay? That's actually what we did here in Zerocash. And actually in Zerocash, we took a very extreme view. Maybe we could have revealed more. Maybe we could have said, if you're transacting like more than $10,000, maybe your payment should be public, right? So there are more fine-grained choices of what to reveal and what not to reveal. And that's the flexibility that zero knowledge brings you. And that's why I'm very excited about working on zero knowledge, because I think this verifiability in the future of systems, it's something that people start caring about. But the moment you kind of publish the entire system state, causes other issues. And zero knowledge, it seems to be like a really good tool for sort of finding this, designing this middle accountability and privacy together. And Zerocash is just one example. So now I can take more questions. I do want to say that point, especially here.
I got a question.
Sure.
So when I think of anonymity, I think of Monero, I think of Dash, I think of Zcash. Why would someone who cares about anonymity today purchase Zerocash?
So I don't know. I mean, so there's a question of what are these cryptocurrencies for, right? So first and foremost, regardless of Zcash, Monero, or Dash, even Bitcoin, it's not clear why you would buy it because you cannot spend it at most cafeterias. Or so even the kind of usability of these cryptocurrencies for day-to-day payments or just, the financial applications is very limited. So all of these cryptocurrencies for general users, they need to sort of penetrate various markets more. Then there's the aspect of speculation. I don't know. I'm not a trader. I cannot give a financial advice on which cryptocurrencies to invest or not. I certainly do believe that from a usability perspective, some cryptocurrency will benefit sort of fractions of humanity in the future in places where traditional financial services are not easily available. Think of remittance money or like developing countries where just it's very hard to find a branch of a bank. Today, I mean, cryptocurrencies are mostly a speculative market, and just some maybe aficionados maybe use them for something. Oh, hey, I paid with Bitcoin, my coffee, I'm so happy today. But it didn't really make a difference to their life. But that's the way it is, right? So systems have to start from humble starts, and whether these cryptocurrencies will eventually achieve wide penetration of markets or other ones, I kind of don't really care too much as long as something works eventually. I think it's a great direction. Does it help with the answer or?
I meant more from an anonymity perspective. So what would be the USP compared to Monero or Dash or
so from an anonymity perspective, it's completely different because Zcash provides strong provable guarantees, whereas Monero and these other things, it's at best laundering services that there's already like a lot of evidence that they can be de-anonymized. So I personally would not feel comfortable like putting all my transactions on Monero. I also don't do it on Zcash for other reasons because I wrote the code. So I think and I don't trust myself in that respect. Now, I'm partly joking, but also saying that in principle, in an ideal world where there's really no issues, and so the fact that Zcash is a new technology, has just been deployed and whatnot, the math is there, and yeah, it's totally fine to put all of your transactions there. It's provably anonymous in that respect. Of course, there are other side channels like your IP address, are using Tor underneath. These are orthogonal issues that sort of you need to have to really use it all the time. As a user, being an individual or a business, you need to take care of the entire attack surface for privacy problems, right? But I mean, what I talked about today is the only approach that we know of today to get strong, provable anonymity guarantees. This is absolutely not the case about Monero. There is an actual transaction graph that leaks a lot of information, less than Bitcoin, but it's a lot of information. I hope that answers the question. Also, Monero, by the way, strikes very different trade-offs in terms of technology. They use very standard crypto, nothing new. So that's also a great advantage for them in that respect. Yes, there was a question.
Can Zcash be used to launder money by changing some coin into Zcash and then back into the coin?
Yeah, of course, you can do that. You can, if you're in the business of money laundering, there are many tools out there, and there always were, there will always be, and this is one of them.
But does this actually solve the problem of traceability that?
Yeah. So in particular, there is no traceability right now. You don't even have to. You can just enter Zcash and stay there forever, and you can exit when you want. And in that case, you will have a full anonymity set, not just the friends that got together for that specific money laundering operation. But money laundering is like a terrible name, right? Because even when you're not a criminal, you kind of still want to launder money, right? Because that's your financial privacy, right? So in Zerocash, there's no money laundering anymore. It's kind of any transaction is automatically protected. Yeah.
So what's the differences between the mining of Bitcoin and mining of Zcash?
Nothing much really. So first, I wasn't really involved in this design, but essentially we use a slightly different hash function for. I think it's a little bit less prone to hardware optimizations and creates all this lopsided world like in Bitcoin. But otherwise, we use the same type of a Nakamoto-style protocol. By the way, just for the record, there's a lot of exciting developments in alternative consensus protocols happening right now, not just with Ethereum planning to move to proof of stake, but even inside theoretical computer science, there are a lot of really cool new ideas that are sort of more efficient, more fair, then there's a notion of fairness also you can define. I won't get into it. I think there will be like a lot of changes in future cryptocurrencies. I think Nakamoto-style protocols will also become deprecated fairly soon. For now, so in Zcash, there's enough innovation in one aspect. We went on something, a proven technology that works. Nakamoto-style proof of work for a consensus protocol. More questions, even remotely. Sorry, like you guys, you cannot, if you raise your hands, I cannot see you. Okay, so still can't see you.
Well, if someone talks,
more.
Really sure.
All right. So, any more questions? Yeah.
Part of me wonders how something like Bitcoin could exist today, given 9/11, Patriot Act, all that sort of stuff in the US. And my answer has been, well, actually, as far as the government is concerned, that Bitcoin destroys privacy.
Yeah, I mean, it's good stuff. I mean, they got confused at the beginning. But now that, especially after the Silk Road investigations, I think they realize it's just like a great thing.
Well, I don't think they want cash to be replaced by Bitcoin, but if it did, okay, great. Now we have this permanent record of how everything happens. So there are one observation is that Bitcoin doesn't actually have any encryption in it. It uses cryptography, hashing and digital signatures. but there's no information being hidden there, right? And so if something like Zcash were to take hold, both of those things have changed. One is now it does use encryption.
Yep.
And so now I'm worried that the government could say, okay, so the export restrictions, we're going to bring them back again, and now we're going to make this illegal.
Mhm.
And also, the government might just say, screw this. We're not going back to mathematically anonymous transactions. Do you have an opinion about that second part? If Zcash were ever to take hold, would it be immediately squished by some government?
Hasn't happened. So first is that our CEO spends a lot of time actually talking to regulators and law enforcement to communicate technology and communicate the fact that actually it can help businesses. Usually good technologies help good people more than bad people. And since I do believe there are more good people than bad people, overall things work out. So if you want to help good people and in the process you also help bad people, that's all right, because kind of there are more good people. And in a particular case of economy, there's all kinds of businesses that they could be made more sort of efficient by maybe updating their financial infrastructure, and certainly cannot do it with Bitcoin because it's just not private enough. A separate point is that Zcash is just one particular trade-off point in the privacy versus accountability space. Again, you could change it easily so that maybe any large payment is not private, right? So that's in fact already the case, right? So if you enter the United States with like a load of cash in your pocket, if it's up to what, $10,000, you can just bring it in and maybe you spend it in a lollipop store or maybe buy some drugs, or it doesn't really matter, like they don't know, right? But if you're bringing in like $1 million in cash, then you have to declare it, right? So there's already some sense in which kind of your financial privacy, you have a right to your own financial privacy as long as you're not moving around millions of dollars, right? Otherwise, we need to start declaring things very explicitly. This is something you can easily do with zero-knowledge proofs. The point of, but we cannot have this discussion before anyone is convinced that this stuff is real, right? So, and nor am I the person to understand these trade-offs. It's not, I mean, I'm a cryptographer. The hell do I know about what are the right trade-offs of this accountability versus privacy trade-off? First, you need to educate people about the privacy problems of Bitcoin, the tools that are out there and how they fix it. And then you can start going out there and trying to figure out, okay, maybe government is worried about this, then change this other thing. And so I think overall it's important to have some technology that it fills in. I mean, I don't think these cryptocurrencies will ever take over cash or traditional credit cards. I think it will just fill in or create different markets. So to maybe address certain needs that weren't addressed by those. So I think it's important to create a good ecosystem, and this is just a start. And us as a company, we're very open and very, so our CEO spends an awful lot amount of time explaining these things and communicating and hearing concerns from both regulators and law enforcement. So I'm really not worried about that. I also think from their perspective, in terms of just economic development and technological innovation, I see no reason why it wouldn't go along with this.
You have to wrap up now.
Sure. Okay, I'll just be out there and I'm happy to talk more.
Thank you.